as we come from the overcast, rainy, stormy Las Vegas right now, as San Bernardino is burning down and cars on the highway have shut down the I-15, as recent news has shown that Washington and much of the West Coast will eventually wash away into the sea. Our topic today is natural disasters. Are we prepared for them? Are civic organizations doing all they can? Some of what they can? Who knows?
No and no.
So let's talk about disasters. My favorite thing to do is go online, and there's a little sheet you make, and it's a zombie survival guide. Yeah. You take your backpack with your antibiotics and your Vicodin and your machete and your machine gun, and preparedness is fun. It's a bit obsessive sometimes, but what's going on right now? How can we prepare for some of the impending natural disasters that's facing our country and the world?
The only solution is lots and lots of money, and that's what people don't want to do, and because it has to come in the form of taxes. So we spent a good chunk of the week talking about that big article in the New Yorker that detailed how the Cascadia fault line, which runs from Sacramento all the way up to Vancouver, BC, is actually one of the biggest, most deadly subduction zones in the world, which means that when tectonic plates slide over and under each other, they can only go so far, and then they snap back into place, and that pulling is what creates these massive earthquakes, and then with being on the coast, the attendant tsunamis. So,
right.
Basically, the estimate was everything west of I-5 will be toast, from Mendocino County all the way up into southern Canada. So my hometown of Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, the capital city, Portland, basically 453 miles of coastline just devastated.
What's the estimated loss of life?
The minimum is 13,000 dead and 27,000 wounded, with FEMA estimated that they need to provide, I think, shelter to like 500,000 people and food and water to like 1.5 to 2 million. And then beyond that, the what they call the, I think the inundation zone is just how far the tsunami would come inland. That's to I-5. But beyond that, they said everything up to the Cascade Mountains would be essentially uninhabitable.
Wow.
For example, Oregon, 90 or 95% of their liquid fuel flows in along the coastline. So immediately their energy source is gone. I think they were saying that it would be 3 to 6 months before electricity is restored, a year to 3 years with no running water and no sewage systems. And then
3 years minimum?
1 to 3 years.
1 to 3 years.
And then 3+ years with no hospitals. So essentially,
who needs hospitals?
Yeah, essentially you're in an apocalyptic scenario there.
Right.
People aren't going to stick around for it. You can leave. Well, some people will be able to leave, but if you're elderly, if you're infirm, if you're disabled in some way, it's a fascinating article. Everybody should check it out. I think it's called The Really Big One, and it's in the latest issue of the New Yorker. But it's just catastrophic. I mean, the casualty estimates are the bare bones because they're assuming that it happens in February.
Right.
I think over the last 10,000 years, they've had 41 incidences that wiped out the coastline. So that's an average of every like 243 years. And the last one was in 1700.
Right.
So we're now 300. Well, yeah, we're now 315 years into a 243-year average. But with them assuming it happens in February, if it happens in the summertime, Oregon's beaches alone get 150,000 people in the summer. So if there's, if it's July, there's 30 to 40,000 people out there. Those people are dead.
Right.
Like, there's nowhere for them to go. They can't get away. You've got 30 minutes if you have an early warning system before the wave hits inland, and the coast does not have an early warning system.
Right. Yeah.
So they talked to this superintendent of schools who's got a couple of K through 12 facilities like right in the inundation zone. They're just going to get wiped out. And he was like, hey, everybody likes kids. Let's try and build a new facility out of the flood zone that they can survive, because these schools are like 10 and 15 feet above sea level.
Right.
The lowest point the wave will be along the entire coastline is 20 feet.
And let me guess, that measure did not succeed.
It did not succeed. It was like, I think it was 100.
Kids.
Yeah, it was a $120 million bond they tried to pass. It would have cost $2.16 per 1,000 square feet of personal, land property. So it would have cost most people, $5,
right.
And it failed by 62%. So the answer is, yeah, fuck those kids. It's the Catholic motto.
Yeah.
Fuck those kids.
Well, an interesting thing, on top of that, and a lot of the research I've done and documentaries I've seen, it would be grand to have, an up armored Humvee full of guns and food and whatever, all that fun, flashy kit that people would want to have. But what it comes down to, especially on the West Coast, is water. Now, if anyone who's seen Chinatown or knows anything about California, water is one of the major concerns in places like LA County. People have been killed and millions of dollars have flown back and forth between hands, legally and otherwise, to make sure that land rights and water rights were available. And California, especially LA County, gets their water as far east as Colorado. And so those pumps stop when some disaster happens, the water stops flowing. And it's the rule of threes. You can spend 3 hours without shelter. You can spend 3 days without. You can
spend more than 3 hours without shelter, let's be honest, unless you're in the Arctic or the Sahara.
That's the consideration, is you're in inclement weather. So okay. 3 hours in inclement weather, you need shelter. 3 days, you need water, and 3 weeks you can go without food. But 3 days without water, you're pretty much done. That's it. You die of dehydration. There should be a word like starvation, because dehydration is a little nebulous. Like, I want a word that just means I died from not having water, because it's common.
Dehydration makes you sound like a pussy.
Yeah.
That has never made a whole lot of sense. Like, did not have water.
Yeah.
People get heat stroke. Like,
he starved. What you can say, he dehydrated.
Yeah,
doesn't
exactly.
Sound cool.
He withered.
Yes.
Maybe call it I don't know what you call it. Who's a deeply, call it like a George Hamilton or a Streisand, or just somebody who's like leathery and wrinkled and looks like they should be dead anyway. Oh, we'll call it the Eastwood.
Sure.
He Eastwooded.
Yeah.
Poor guy, man. He went out there without water and he Eastwooded.
So millions of people will Eastwood in California, especially in places like San Diego, LA County, because there's no water. And then when I worked for public health, I had an opportunity to work for public health. We've talked about
where
in the South Pacific, in Asia, the island of Saipan and Guam. And so the CDC talks about CEDs. When they measure death, it's CEDs, crude estimate of death. And that is in the units of 10,000. When I was in Bali for the first time, Jen, my wife now, and I landed the day of the tsunami.
And that was
2004, December 25th, right on Christmas.
Wow.
For the Christians out there, yay, Santa Claus.
And the pagans whose holiday was hijacked to become Christmas.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's
Saturnalia.
Interesting side note. That's why Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate Christmas. I didn't know that they don't. They're kind of the real Christians.
They are.
They don't participate in war.
Yeah.
They're not going to raise up arms.
They don't judge you.
They don't judge you. They say, okay, it's got to be a true Christian ritual for them to participate, and they ignore the co-opting that what was that emperor back in the day?
Constantine?
I think it was Constantine who co-opted the pagan winter solstice to be the big Christian holiday. They stick to the historical record and the historical facts in as much as any religion contains them.
Right.
I thought that was really interesting. Go Jehovah's Witnesses. But anyway.
Right. So when I was in Bali, we landed on December 25th. Yay, winter solstice. And luckily or not, we were given mixed drinks that contained ice, which contained shit on people's hands. Don't eat ice in Asia. Oh, well, no, that's not true in Bali.
Or drink the water.
Third world countries have bad water processing. But anyway, so we were stuck having it come out all ends for 3 days in our hotel room, which was lovely, but it was miserable. At the end of the 3 days, we went outside and there was the pallor of death everywhere. While Bali itself was safe, we were, at the precipice of the largest natural disaster in modern history.
Recent history.
And the newspapers, the televisions in Indonesia don't shy away from showing dead bodies the way we do in the United States. So there was death everywhere. And over 250,000 people, I think, all said and done, had perished. And what had happened is the monks started cremating the bodies, because the biggest concern after the initial event in any natural disaster is vector control. You have no
rotting
water,
bodies.
You have rotting bodies, and you have insects that will come in droves and start doing their job, which
cleanup.
And so what happens with that is a lot of disease, a lot of cholera infection, and that's where the problems really start to set in.
So were you completely unaware for those 72 hours that the world was essentially collapsing in that part of the sphere?
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't have TV. We didn't leave the room. We drank the sodas in the mini fridge and then puked them up. And it was a pretty pathetic sight. Jen and I were sitting in our underwear, fat, sweaty blobs of sick people. And we didn't leave the room for 3 days. I mean, couldn't get 5 feet from the toilet. It was bad.
So it sounds kind of like a Twilight Zone concept, like that famous one about this guy who all he wants to do is read. And then he stumbles out of his library and the world has ended. He's like, huzzah, and then his classes break. He's like, I finally had time.
Right.
It'd be amazing to just be violently ill. It'd be kind of like 28 Days Later, where you're violently ill, you wake up, you go outside, everything's destroyed, you have no idea why. What happened?
Cillian Murphy with his impressive dong stumbles out of his hospital bed.
Everyone was peaky blinded after that scene. Heyo, great show, by the way, but what a stupid fucking name.
Oh, I can't watch it because of the name.
Don't fuck with the Peaky Blinders. Like, I don't care if it's historically accurate. It's a pathetic name.
We're the Jets.
Yeah, like snap-offs are not impressive. The name Peaky Blinders is not impressive. Plus, people had guns and knives, so going at them with like a hat. And listen, I understand if it works once, where it's like, oh shit, the dude's hat has razor blades in it. But how does it keep working over and over and over?
Fool me once, shame on you.
Like, maybe just stay out of hat's reach, guys. You know, at least go Hell's Angels style. We carry on some hammers, and then you've got a little bit of extension instead of like literally the end of your fingertips is as far as you can get. Terrible. So what was the aftermath of that like? How long were you there for?
We were there for 2 weeks, and so we didn't really see the brunt of a lot of the cleanup. But we were witness to a lot of death, a lot of government inefficiency in dealing with a disaster. What was happening is the Hindu monks, were going and taking the bodies and burning the bodies because they understood the vector control was going on. Now, you have two populations abutting one another in Indonesia, the Hindu population and the Muslim population.
Good thing they get along famously well.
Absolutely.
Always.
In Muslim culture, Islamic culture, it is very critical to clean, dress, bless, and then bury a body within a day of the death. This was not possible, and there was a lot of conflict.
Enjoy your rituals. You will all die because of them.
Right.
Which, in that case, fine. More air and timber for the rest of us. I don't really have sympathy for somebody whose rituals fly in the face of common sense. Like, you're going to have outbreaks of cholera, and Ebola, and West Nile, and malaria as a direct result of what you're doing. Like, if then fine, you pays your money and you take your chances, go for it. Do your rituals, die by the tens of thousands. Let the Hindus live, though. They're trying to do the right thing.
So what I was able to see by the end of the 2 weeks I was there, and I followed the news because anytime you're witness to something, anytime you're a part of something that most people aren't, you tend to try to stay in touch with that. You've been part of something special, so you want to continue to feel special by knowing that thing. It's the Facebook effect. I'm cool because of these things I consume. Look at my personality. But what happened is the United States, Japan, and the Dutch, because Indonesia was a former Dutch colony, started to send support and logistical help in moving bodies and everything like that. It was a slow slog. And I mean, of course, it happened in Thailand too. Phuket was pretty much ground zero in Thailand, Medan in Indonesia. And I had a friend who lived in Medan afterwards, which is, I believe, on Jakarta, on the west side of Jakarta, if I'm not mistaken. He showed me a map, and the map shows pre-2004 tsunami, the coastline, and then post-tsunami. And it's something like 1.2 miles of earth vanished, disappeared.
Wow. Along the entire coastline? Not just 1.2 miles cumulatively?
No, I mean, the coastline had evaporated and gone back. The sea reclaimed much of the land. Yeah. And that's crazy. And we worry about things in the United States and we budget for anti-terrorism. That seems to be the prevalent government mindset. Yet if you look at homeland security, the biggest threat is climate change. 60 to 80 million people live worldwide along coasts. In the United States alone, you've got populations like New York, Boston, Virginia, and Miami, which are at or below sea level. Miami is below sea level. Yeah. And same thing with New Orleans, below sea level, because of the levee system and the floodplains. So you're looking at, I think the estimate is at least 4 million people within, if the water rises up 6 inches, which is so possible with a 1 degree change in temperature worldwide, which
we're definitely making that. We're making dreams come true.
Yeah. So we're preparing, it seems, for the wrong thing. And because of political will and because of government contracts in the military industrial complex, money keeps flowing into the Department of Homeland Security, and JSOC, Joint Strategic Operations Command, keeps holding out, pulling off targeted raids throughout the world. Now they've expanded their purview from.
There's no drones for earthquakes.
Right. They've gone beyond just Iraq and Afghanistan, and now are running drone flights and then subsequent targeted missions in Yemen and
Syria,
Pakistan. Libya, Pakistan, and so
you're next, France. We're coming for that ass.
As the kill list grows and grows and money flows that way, we're not focusing on what is really our true security issue, which is
the land part of Homeland.
The homeland. Right?
It's like, well, the borders are secure until the borders collapse into the ocean. It's like, God, how could we have seen this coming? One thing that was interesting that I've seen pop up in a few different places is that part of the problem is A, our limited lifespans, and then B, our attention spans. Because Japan is the most tsunami and earthquake prepared country on earth, because they have low-level earthquakes weekly.
Sure. And
big ones and tsunamis periodically. I mean, the word typhoon that we have adopted into our language comes from the Japanese, TAI-FUN, typhoon, which means supreme wind.
Right.
Or it could be Chinese. Same thing. Either way, China and Japan have a long history of cordial relations, so it's fine.
They're toads.
I can't remember my James Clavell novels. It's either Cantonese or Japanese, but typhoon and supreme wind. And so they've been dealing with them for hundreds of years. And they have the most extensive seismological and climatological records in the world. And even then, they go back to, what was it, the 1500s, I believe? Or it might be 599 AD. So even like 1500 years.
Sure.
So 1500 years, they've got records going back, which is delightful. But the Earth is millions and millions of years old.
Right.
Humanity itself is like 10,000 years old. Yeah. Maybe in our current like civilized form. We've only had the printing press for 600 years.
Man has come down from Jesus Christ's butt since 4,000.
I'm sorry.
4,000 years we've been on this earth.
Sorry, the world is 45 minutes old.
By the grace of God.
Yeah, exactly. And we were queefed out by the Mother Earth, which was knocked up by God's intergalactic giant dick. We are all celestial nut. Anyway, so really the science isn't that new. I mean, they only discovered isn't that old rather. They only discovered the Cascadia zone, I think, in the last 50 years. And I used to I didn't know. I was talking to my mom about this article, and I always just assumed that Washington was safe. And I used to laugh at like Oklahoma and Miami, and like, haha.
We've had that conversation.
Yeah, you cunts get wiped out like every 20 years or every 20 weeks by something is going to happen. Well, the entire West Coast gets obliterated every couple of centuries. Yeah. So I'd rather take that as long as I fall in like the dead zone. Like, give me that. My sister and I were talking. It was like, all right, give it another 60 years. Like, there's a 1 in 3 chance that it happens in the next 50 years, which is about as precise as they can get. Because it can be like, the way that they're looking at it, like the plate should snap back in any second, but you're talking about something that operates on an entirely different time scale.
Right. That's what happened in Mexico City. You had plates. You had a couple of different.
That was what, 86?
85. You had a couple of different seismological events going on, but one of them was the snapping back of the plates, and one of them was the fact that the sound waves or the shock waves ran into each other and created a, what is it, induction zone or sublimation zone or whatever.
Almost like how a hurricane forms.
Right.
Hot air slams into the cold air, bam, big storm. You had that with plates.
Right. Yeah. With Mexico City, the problem, by and large, was a man-made thing because of corrupt government contracting for buildings that were not built well. They had two buildings that were something like 80 stories high that instead of being independently buttressed and supported, they were tethered together because it was cheaper. So when the earthquake happened, the earth pulled the two buildings and they went and killed thousands of people.
You can see the footage and it looks like, I mean, you can see that disaster movies have been modeled on that. Buildings were falling into each other. They were falling apart, like just buildings were snapping in half and falling, and you just see people. I mean, it's just horrific. And it's interesting. John D. McDonald, one of my favorite authors, longtime resident of Fort Lauderdale, wrote about in the 60s, 70s, and 80s the dramatic overbuilding on the Florida coast, and put it in really stark terms. Some of his writing in things like Key to the Sweet and some of the Travis McGee novels really examines in that clarity that I like, talking about real geopolitical issues, about how people wanted to live there, so they just drained swamps, threw up shitty houses, didn't bolt them to the foundations. And then it was actually Hurricane Andrew, which happened, I think, 4 years after he passed away. 92. Yeah, I think he died in 88. He'd been predicting that all it takes is one big one, and half of Florida is going to be gone. Andrew
wiped out pretty much half of Florida.
Right. I mean, it was billions of dollars 23 years ago. The thing is, people just, people like me even say, oh, well, it's on the coastline, what do you expect? Well, the Netherlands is somehow still here, and that shit is, a mile below sea level or some crazy shit, and they're doing just fine.
Right.
Japan's science was off, but they hadn't been destroyed by a tsunami in a couple of millennia.
Short of Fukushima being built on fault lines and that being a huge disappointment, they put planning in, and they do have extremely high tax rates, but the population is comfortable with that planning, with that preparedness.
Yeah, they used the best science they had available, and the problem was the science wasn't good enough. They didn't estimate high enough.
But do you think in a country right now where we have politicians, elected politicians in the House and the Senate, denying climate change, denying the fact that the earth is getting warmer because there's fucking winter, and throwing snowballs, do you think we'll ever get to a point where we say, look, here's not a possibility, a probability that this is going to happen within the next 50 years?
It's a certainty.
It's a certainty.
We just cannot give you the exact time of day, and that's what people operate on.
Right. And it's a certainty, yet I don't think anything will change.
I don't think so either. I mean, for here, it's because nobody wants to pay more taxes. Right. And infrastructure is fucking expensive. Bridges, roads, early warning systems, you're talking hundreds of millions and billions of dollars.
The last large push was the Eisenhower road system, which built most of the I's, I-95, I-75, I-40, I-70, I-10. And that was because they wanted to land a fucking 747 or a B-52 anywhere in the country because they thought Russia would invade. Yeah. Now, that's the political will, is let's fight, let's kill, let's build military.
Yeah, well, it's the thing. I mean, the problem is too, people want to see results, and so if you build like Japan thought they had done as well as they could with the science they had. It's not like they cut any corners,
right?
And your survival depends on it because it's reinforced every week. Something like the West Coast, like this country is only like 400 or 500 years old maximum, and we've only had been in our current construct for like 100 years. So 2.5 times that is what generally happens on average with the West Coast wipeout. Florida, you're going to get hurricanes. The Midwest, you're going to get tornadoes. The Pacific Northwest, we didn't know, or I didn't know.
You guys thought you were bulletproof.
Yeah, well, and my mom was saying like, oh yeah, we've heard that for like 30 years, and I'm like, and you just think you think they're just making that shit up? Like, I'm glad I left. I mean, and even them, like my dad's going to be retiring in a few years, and my family's got a bunch of property up in the mountains in southeastern Washington. And they're going to build a big custom, fuck off cabin and live up there and spend half the time down here in Vegas and then half the time up there. So I'm like, that's the way to do it, man.
Yeah.
Like, we've had cabins up there forever. It's a solid granite cliff face. Like the only thing that can bring that thing down would be a nuke. So, and nobody's going to nuke, southeastern Washington. Nobody gives a shit about tiny resort towns. But yeah, it's just the obliviousness to it is, or in the willful disregard. And then, oh my God, it happened. We're all sad. I'm like, well, listen, now that I know about that, you couldn't pay me to live in Seattle.
Yeah.
If it doesn't happen within my lifetime, fantastic. I hope it doesn't. But if it does, after this kind of publicity is out there, it's not a tragedy that these things happen. People could just fucking leave, and they don't. So then you're rolling the dice. And as far as I'm concerned, you pays your money and you takes your chances. Yeah. You want to live in the Florida coast, you get wiped out by a tropical storm, boo-hoo. You live in Washington on the coast, or Oregon, or as far south as Sacramento or north to BC, and you get wiped out. It's not a shock.
It's a shame. That whole area is beautiful. Vancouver and Seattle and Portland. I mean, it's just a beautiful part of the country. I haven't traveled there very much, but I mean, it's just the people, the culture. It's cool. I mean, this is the home of legalization and decriminalization of marijuana for the United States was Washington. Yeah.
Washington, Colorado, the 1-2 punch, and long may it continue. I'm hoping it lasts 60 years. Me and my sister were talking about, like, all right, 50 years, well, we'll be dying but not dead. 60 years, we'll probably definitely be dead. So that'd be kind of a cool way to go. Be like, perched up in a nursing home, just see this wall of water coming in. Be like, all right, well, I'm 91. Who gives a shit?
Right.
I wouldn't mind. But at 31, I'd like a few more decades. But it's kind of funny because I always heard that Vegas was built on a big fault line, and it's built near a fault line, but it's a very, very small one.
Right.
What's really at risk here in Nevada is the northern part of the state.
Oh, yeah.
Nye County and Battle Mountain and a bunch of shitholes.
The really awesome part of the state.
Yeah, yay, Reno. Like, Reno could sink into the earth, and I'd be sad because of the Tesla's Gigafactory going away. But that's it. I mean, I don't give a shit about the northern part of the state. So I'm actually safe here in Sin City, and the tranquil, polite, civilized, very friendly, welcoming Pacific Northwest is just doomed. So
I think my plan I originally was gonna, if like, let's say the zombie apocalypse happens, and I love that the CDC appropriated the zombie apocalypse as a kind of guide for all other real apocalyptic type scenarios.
Apocalyptic.
But
indubitably.
They took that as a kind of guide to excite people and to say, hey, if you survive a zombie apocalypse, you also might survive tsunamis and earthquakes and natural disasters and things that actually might happen.
Well, interestingly, first of all, I like the term apocalyptic should be the term for anything in pop culture that deals with apocalyptic things.
Apocalyptic.
It should be a genre. Right. So apocalyptic, and then apocalyptic is where people breakdance.
There actually is a word for it, though. It's called eschatological. That's anything that has to do with doomsday.
Yeah, but it's got scatological in there, which just makes me think of poop. So it's a poop doomsday.
Yeah.
It's a dooms poop or a poop day.
I always was really shocked that end of the world eschatological and things having to do with shit, eschatological had almost the same root. But then I thought, the end of the world's pretty shitty, so it works out.
Hey, I see what you did there. Yeah, I am, man, for all that Westboro Baptist Church loves to do the God hates fags thing and religious fundamentals of all stripes like to blame natural disasters on, human miscellaneous. Like the great comedian Kurt Metzger likes to say, is like the universe is almost an infinite place, and God made it, and he's up there, he's got all this shit to worry about, and he's up there with a jeweler's loupe, like, what are they doing with their buttholes? Are they using them for the way? Oh my God, what are you doing? Yeah. Oh my me, I cannot believe what they are doing. You know what? That's it. Tsunamis.
Yeah.
Tsunamis. Like, it is pretty insane. But the thing that's most difficult to survive is a tsunami.
Yeah.
Because the water moves faster than you can, unless you're on high ground or within like 10 minutes of it, you're toast. You can't breathe underwater. It's usually bringing in a bunch of shit from the coast anyway. Like, you're done.
Yeah. Cars, rocks, boulders, parts of buildings. When you've got an SUV floating at 30 miles per hour through water,
boats. I mean,
there's no way you can survive except by sheer luck if you're in that zone.
Yeah, I mean, the force calculations are staggering. I remember, being a big dork, and I love heavy machinery. I used to work for a company that ran heavy industry and had a big tunnel boring machine, but like the big Lowber like dump trucks that they use on like
those
massive mines. Yeah, they look like moving houses.
Those were my favorite growing up as a kid.
Yeah, I mean, they can hold like 169 tons worth of debris, and I calculated once they can go 40 miles an hour fully loaded. You know that shit?
That's a lot of mass.
They've got like
acceleration.
I think they have 2 or 4 1,000 horsepower engines.
It's like a jet.
Yeah, so I calculated out. I'm like, okay, one of those is fully loaded. I mean, the tires are like 20 feet tall.
Right.
And one of those is fully loaded, goes 40 miles an hour and hits something. What kind of impact is that? And I can't remember the exact calculation, but it was something like 1,500 Hiroshima bombs.
Wow.
Like it could wipe out like a city essentially. Like it's not going to slow down. You know, it's kind of like one of my guns was a Desert Eagle. It was a gift. I didn't think like I need it for defense. Like
50 caliber.
50 caliber Action Express, which is basically an anti-tank round. I mean, the shell is like 8 inches tall or something. If I was to try and use that for self-defense, and I managed to somehow hit somebody with this hand cannon, the bullet would go through them, it'd go through the wall, it'd go across the street, it'd go through that wall, and then it would go through whoever was behind that wall. Right. So I managed to kill like 2 houses and 2 people.
It's not a practical weapon.
It's not a practical weapon. And so you look at something like a tsunami, you know, okay, a fully loaded dump truck going can wipe out a city block. A tsunami, you're talking about a wall of water, like that mass times that acceleration. You know, they say that the average speed of a tsunami wave is only like 14 miles an hour. But ankle deep water, 3 inches of water, going 6 miles an hour can knock a full-grown man off his feet. Sure. Because it's about your points of contact with the earth. Friction. So if you got the ocean coming in at you, that kind of mass could be going 1 mile an hour and it would still level everything. Yeah. So it's just truly awesome. Not in a good way, but in that just the scope of
it
galaxy.
Inspires awe.
I mean, there's nothing you can do, man. The only solution is to live inland underground, somewhere where there's no earthquakes.
Or as there are some indigenous tribes that are maritime seafaring tribes in Indonesia, they didn't necessarily have a recorded history of tsunamis, but they had a kind of intuitive understanding and connection, almost like a symbiosis with the earth. And we've talked about this. They went out on their outriggers and stayed out to sea several miles until it subsided.
Where?
This is in the west coast of Indonesia.
Oh, this was in the same time frame?
Right. During the tsunami, they were able to survive, and they had little, you know, huts on the beach type of situation. And they all got in their outriggers and went out to sea because they saw the signs coming. And we've talked about it before. There's what is that called? The first wave in a sounder wave, right? Yeah. So they were in such harmony with their surroundings that they knew that sounder wave was there, and it gave them enough time to get mobilized.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was reading more in that article. There's like Japan's early warning system. Like you can install this stuff where, okay, the alarms go off. It says we got some shit coming in. It locks open elevator doors. It sends messages to hospitals. Hey, stop surgeries. Brilliant. All this stuff that mobilizes disaster preparedness. And we have none of that on the West Coast. We don't really have that throughout the country.
Well, even in Katrina, people died during surgery. People were left in hospitals, the sick, the infirm, the most vulnerable in our society were left to die. And it was not only, I think, will we as a country not necessarily do anything to prepare for this event or really any impending natural disasters. It's more likely that we're going to do things to fuck with it, to make it worse. Look at the levee situation, the Katrina. Look at the heating up of the Gulf of Mexico, which 2-3 degrees warmer water can cause a class 5 hurricane instead of a class 3. And these are what we've done as a society to exacerbate Mother Nature's already awe-inspiring power.
Yeah, I mean, the Native American oral tradition goes back 7-8 generations in my neck of the woods. And when they finally had the climatological science to back it up, they found that it dovetailed perfectly with their stories about what happened, where 7 generations ago, tribes who lived along the coast vanished. Right. And when their, cousin neighbor tribes came to do like the annual meetups, they're like, there's canoes and trees and everybody's gone. Right. And it was like, ha, dumb Indians, have some wampum and some plague blankets. And then they found the science actually matched up with it. It doesn't really speak well of us. We just ignored them until we could prove it. But that was people living in teepees, and huts and makeshift shelters along the shore, and that was destroyed. When you got entire modern infrastructure built up, it's a multiplier effect. Sure. It's somebody in the New York article was talking about how it's any like 1 of 3 bad things can happen, and in a tsunami, like all of them happen. Right. And they know what the inundation zone is. They've known it for 20 plus years. And so it's illegal to build critical infrastructure in there in Oregon. Right. Firehouses, hospitals, schools. The problem is there's already stuff there that is critical, and all the modern construction is not prohibited from building there. So all there's required to do is go consult with, I think it's called DOGAMI, which is the Department, or OGAMI, the Oregon Geological and Meteorological Institute or something.
Cool acronym, bro.
Exactly. So they go in there and they say, we want to build here. And they say, that's really fucking dumb. And they're like, cool, we've consulted, we're going to do it anyway. So you've got things like liquid fuel lines, you've got power stations, you've got hospitals, you've got firehouses, you've got all these things. You know, a big power station, if that's wiped out and starts fires, a fuel processing plant, like the pollution, the fire, the accompanying disaster that happens with that. And then emergency personnel, like you have, it's not just, okay, people are wet,
right,
and houses got washed away. It's everything is on fire,
right,
everything is destroyed. And that's the problem. It's not that, you know, yes, the loss of life is a problem, but everything going up like popcorn is what is the real prevents relief.
Well, that's the thing, is most people are able to wrap their mind around the fact that if something is burned, if a house is burnt down, it's destroyed irrevocably. There's nothing you can do there, even if it's partially contained. The smoke damage and, to my point, the water damage make it so it's untenable to live there. But water damage is extremely, extremely powerful. If you talk about with housing, with natural land masses, you've got salt water, which if you've got tens of thousands, millions of gallons of salt water that is drawn into that coastline, you're killing everything, plants, trees. You're infecting the sewage lines. The pH balance goes, and that gets contaminated. The fresh water lines, the freshwater supplies, any sort of farmland. And I'm talking about houses, standing water in houses, the mold, the bacteria, the infection, the vector control,
the rot.
Right. Water is not always our friend if it is in places where it shouldn't be. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Like you were talking about the New Yorker article, that's definitely one of the major concerns when you've got any sort of natural disaster, is standing water. And then as soon as that water's been there for a period of time, especially if it's filled with detritus, it becomes so rapidly contaminated, infected, that it becomes choleric.
Yeah, it's the reason that the Japanese built their houses out of very light wood and paper.
Right.
Because a town or a city or a village could be completely destroyed by an earthquake, a flood, a hurricane, and they could rebuild it in a week.
Yeah.
And so they just adapted to it. We are not that bright. And, I just read something, they just approved the tallest hotel in Seattle is now approved. It's going to break ground this year, probably done by the end of 2018.
Lovely.
2,500, I forget how many, how tall it is, but it's like 250,000 square feet of retail and this and that, like a 4-story deep parking garage. And modern infrastructure to withstand even earthquakes in the Northwest is only about 20 years old, like 1994, 1995, to withstand like a magnitude 9 earthquake. It's like bolted to its foundation, make sure the foundation can shift so the house will shift with it. And so most infrastructure is more than 20 years old. So it's just, whenever it happens, goodbye. I mean, there's nothing, I don't know what they could do, because you can't go through and retrofit every existing building.
No.
You can't go through and put
that'd be more expensive than starting over.
Yeah. So it's just, I think people, they'll hear about it, they'll be like, wow, that sucks for a while. And then it's like, well, back to my life. Hopefully it doesn't happen during my lifetime.
And I think it speaks to a kind of cultural arrogance, and that the Occidental, the Western culture has. You've got, religion plays a large part. And if you look at any high peak or mountain in the Western hemisphere, there's a goddamn statue of Jesus or Mary or something, hovering ubiquitously above the city. It's that idea that if we build it larger, bigger, more vast and gild it and cover it in gold, that it will reflect the potency and virility of society. And that kind of works against any sort of natural symbiosis with Mother Nature. We're not living in balance or in unity with our surroundings. We're taking it over. And one of my favorite things is from The Matrix, where Agent Smith goes, when he tries to classify humans, he can't classify us as mammals because all mammals naturally, instinctively learn to live in harmony with their environment. And yet we come in, we fuck and eat and dump trash and overpopulate and overconsume, and he equates us to a virus. And I think that is that has its merits if you look at the fact that, especially in the United States, we've got this sense of manifest destiny where we just want to fuck, pillage, rape, kill, and take everything, put our flag in it, and claim it for ourselves.
Yeah, it makes sense when you, like, what happens to a cancerous cell? It disintegrates, it explodes.
It gets filled up with the mutagenetic,
explodes and then dies. When cancer is successful, the host and the cancer die. Yeah. So at a certain point, if we're successful with what we do, which we have been for centuries, we're going to make it untenable to live here through global warming or otherwise, just pollution, war, famine, disease. And honestly, I mean, being aware of this stuff is fine. But for me, again, I just kind of hope it outlives it. I outlast it, or I make it to a certain point in my life where when something like that happens, like, I'm fine with it. Right. So there's not a lot that you can do. I can't do anything about it.
No.
Like, people who are trying can't seem to get anything done.
Right.
So just live in a place where a cloud can't kill you, and the earth is less likely to shake, and just get like a really sturdy house, and then lay in a survival set of supplies like you're talking about, that checklist.
What I find really interesting, there's a show called Life After Man, I believe it is. It's a History Channel show, and what's really fascinating is all our monuments and all that we've built in our society as civilization, this wonderful creation who is man. Within months, years, decades, most of what we've built will be reclaimed. If you think about it, concrete is an amalgam of sand, cement, and a couple other minerals. You've got glass, which slowly, it was just silica, it's sand. You've got steel, which will rust and will eventually
from iron ore,
come back and turn into iron and all the ferrous material. And buildings will be reclaimed slowly but surely. Their structural integrity will go. They'll collapse. The only thing that's really going to stay is plastics and styrofoams and
nuclear waste
and a handful of other things. But if you look at the Pacific, there's a large Texas-sized almost island in the Pacific full of plastic detritus.
It's just garbage.
And it's just trash. And one of the interesting things in Saipan is on the west coast of Saipan, which gets all the trash from China thousands of miles away. You have little bits of plastic that have washed up like stones because they've been sanded and the logos are all peeled off. So you've got this kind of contemporary postmodern, skipping stones all over the coast. And it's
where?
Saipan, where I lived.
Wow.
So you've got nothing but little bits, and they look like rocks, but they're orange and yellow and pink and blue, and they're little bits of plastic that have migrated from China, who have dumped their garbage off into the coast, into the Indian Ocean or the wherever, and it migrates over and it turns into these little stones. So even plastic and the things that we have made so well through virtue of chemicals and whatnot, all it's going to be is stones in 10,000 years, and whatever next civilization occurs, whether it's man or some sort of other animal, that's all that will be left of us. It's little pieces of plastic that will be the new beach stones.
Yeah, I read this article recently that said, how would we mark things like nuclear waste so that a society 10,000 years in the future knows, hey, do not open this?
Yeah.
And they didn't really have a solution. We don't know what cave paintings tried to signify.
Right.
It could have been a map. It could have been directions. Could have been early versions of dig pics.
So much without context.
My wang is like buffalo. My buffalo will be part of your deer. Like, we have no idea. And so I don't really give a shit. Like, good luck, people 10,000 years in the future. And that's most likely where most of these problems come from, is that attitude. I'm like, well, listen, I'm not doing anything to contribute to or I'm doing way less to contribute to the problem. And what I'm interested in is, like, okay, so America's toast, that's fine. That region of the world that you were in 11 years ago now, they know that they can get wiped out by this. What steps have those countries taken, if any?
Right. So again, you've got a kind of you've got a couple different answers. If there is enough money, they've done early warning systems. There's parts of the islands, or areas out there where people don't build. But honestly, it's just like rolling the dice. Most places,
they're just back to business as usual.
Back to business as usual. Let's build it up as best as we can. But there's really not any sort of great plan in place. In a kind of different aspect, if you look at, like, first of all, bioterror is a real thing. You can take, like you were saying, nuclear waste and steal that and turn it into a dirty bomb, or take a virus or a bacteria or anthrax or whatever. There's any number of ways that someone, if motivated to, could take some sort of bioterror agent and introduce it. And one of the interesting things that I experienced was I was a public information officer at a hospital. And right out of college, and I bullshitted my way into the job, and it paid $30,000, but it was like I got to be on TV, and I was the spokesman for, big white guys, the spokesperson for a hospital populated with a bunch of brown people, and it was very interesting experience. But my favorite thing was we ran a bioterrorism preparedness drill, and what our job was to do was to go ahead and deal with business as usual. And basically these people dressed up like zombies started migrating towards the hospital to kind of mimic if there were some sort of bioterror exposure. So these people walking in, were meant to, because of the plan that we had in place and we had practiced it and we had written this very, very specific way of containing any major event. But by the time we were 20 minutes into the drill, there were zombies wandering all around the hospital, and there was no order, and it was complete chaos. And it just showed me that no matter how prepared you think you are for something, it comes down to the execution, and whether it's the will of people doing the job that they're supposed to do, or it's whether it's, a multi-million-dollar defense system being actually in place and actually working. There are so many ifs, and there are so many things that could prevent even good planning, even a great, preparedness procedure. And if it's not absolutely 100% executed perfectly, it's bullshit. It's a waste of time.
Yeah, and I think the will of the people gets overlooked sometimes because it is pretty apathetic even when they know about it. I mean, you've always got the morons when stuff has happened. They're like, I'm not going to evacuate, and they get burned or drowned or blown up or shot or whatever. And it's like, I don't care about those people. Like, it sucks when people don't know or know and can't do anything about it. Sure. Those are the only two groups I have sympathy for. Yeah. Everybody else, like, okay, yes, it's bad that it happened to them, bad for them, but I mean, honestly, looking at it from the overpopulation standpoint, like, how else are we going to get rid of some of these fucking people? I'd rather it not be my people. I like my family and my friends. I don't want them to go anywhere. But man, we've added, what did you tell me the other week? How many people we added in the last 100 years?
So in 1905, there were 1 billion people on Earth. And by 2015, we have approximately 7 billion people on Earth.
We are metastasizing.
Yeah, we are the virus which is going to explode the cell in which it exists.
And that pretty blue cell that we live in is going to, at some point, just wipe us out. I mean, it's the sun's going to burn out in a couple billion years, whatever. So it's just, I don't know. I mean, it's like a big ocean liner. You move it 1 or 2 degrees. That's a pretty serious shift in steerage. So the planet being a big ass ship, we've managed to shift it 1 or 2 degrees in 100 years. Maybe the shift doesn't, or the self-correction doesn't happen in for another 100 years. Lord, let that be the case. But this, man, I just don't know. It's fascinating to see and read about this stuff in terms, it makes what we've talked about with like drug enforcement, like people only care about the status quo, and the status quo affects their lives. And the ultimate privilege is not having to think about something. Right. I hear about the tsunami in Japan and the tsunami 2004, and it's like, sucks for them. Then you're like, wait a minute, like where I grew up could be wiped out, or excuse me, will be wiped out. Like, oh, now it matters.
Well, we live in a really interesting time because historically, the only way that information really spread was through trade routes, any mass communication,
oral tradition,
caravans, trade. So you had people living, let's say, in the Dark Ages in England who knew nothing about the medical advancements going on in Iran or the Persian Empire.
Right.
You know, with
they invented math and medicine.
Right. With the what do they call them? The caliphas, the
caliphate,
or the healers. You know, the healers in Persia.
Doctors
were doing whatever the name is. They were doing cataract surgery in 1000 AD, whereas my and your ancestors were wearing extra long furs that hung down behind their ass, so that when they shit, they can take that extra piece of fur that was their clothes and wipe their ass with it. And they were dying of syphilis and
gangrene
and septicemia
malaria
and whatever. And appendicitis. If your appendix bursts back then, you're dead. Forget about it. But basically, we live in a time now where we have this hyper exposure to media, and that creates a certain level of anxiety. But it also is historical in the sense that we understand our surroundings on Earth better than we've ever, yet it affects us less and less. So it creates this major, super apathy where we know so much shit, yet we can do so little about 99.9% of it that, there's
creates that fatalism.
Yeah.
Like, we're doomed anyway, so fuck it, enjoy today.
Right.
Right.
Which, I don't know if that's such a bad thing, because
otherwise you'd be paralyzed.
Right. I think no matter what, there's a world-ending, population-ending scenario at some point. We talk about the arrogance of wanting to be the last generation. Everyone wants to go out, with the Titanic, so to speak. No one wants to die before the big party.
Yeah.
And so there's a natural desire to want to go down with the ship, and yet most likely it's not going to happen within our lifetime. But there's so many possibilities, from these tsunamis and earthquakes that will occur on the West Coast, to the policy that the United States has, the treaty we have with Taiwan, which says we are fully committed to defend Taiwan if China invades. I mean, that's a world.
Well, listen, and a treaty is fine, but it's not like a button gets pressed and all of a sudden, like, the president gets an electrical shock. And he's got to send in the Marines.
Psych, sorry, but
yeah, I mean, it depends.
There are a lot of scenarios. Man-made natural disasters are kind of a combination of both that could take us out. And so,
well, it's interesting. Rich countries matter less and less on the international stage. I read this big article on sweatshops and how they're still around, and basically it happens as a result of contracting. Like, Walmart or Nike might have a policy saying don't work with these companies. We know they're sweatshops. They give their contract to a middleman who then farms it out to those same sweatshops. They don't tell them about it.
Right.
All that matters is that the stuff comes in on time. But the reason that boycotts and stuff aren't effective is because we are not the majority purchaser for these people anymore. I think 60 to 70% of the clothes India makes is for Indian consumption. 56% of the clothes China makes is for Chinese consumption. And these countries are swapping their stuff back and forth. So I think they said that rich purchasing power for rich countries it was at 60%. It's going to be less than 30% in the next 10 years. So if you have no clout, nobody's going to pay attention to you. Right. So it's really interesting to see how that leveling off kind of creates more tribalism, if that makes sense. It's like, all right, it's the people you work directly with that matter, like your neighbors around you, and the people you have big agreements with. But if you're only like 10% of somebody's business, that they don't need to pay attention to what you specifically want.
We always talk about it, instead of selling 50 Ferraris a year, I'd rather sell 8 million Hyundais.
Right. Yeah. And that's what everybody's making,
Well, I think it's interesting. And what you're going to see is, we've talked about this, and peak oil is a fact that exists. We talked about the asymptotic slants or slopes of the amount of oil left in the world and the amount of oil Americans think will exist into. That
goes up to infinity, and then the other one goes down to zero.
The biggest variable in any production, whether it's copper mining or production of cell phones, is the cost of oil. That's the single biggest variable in 99.9% of industries. And so as that price goes up, the cost of everything goes up.
Right.
The status quo of middle class life no longer will exist in a way that you're not going to be able to do a lot of the things that we take for granted right now. This, for better or for worse, is the peak of human civilization. And within 50 years, there will be concessions that we will have to make, and we will naturally adapt to, because that's what we do, for better or for worse. We adapt to situations. And you're going to find that we're going to have to endure a lot more and live with a lot less. And really, as the middle class, like you suggested, in China and India are growing, the middle class in the United States is shrinking. So you've got this kind of us and them mentality where the masses of people are going back to be how they were 10,000 years ago or 5,000 years ago, just the huddled masses. And then there's the few on top, the kings, the feudal system. The feudal system. Yeah. And so, yeah, you're going to see a lot more of that turfing of people and clanning. But also another interesting fact is, as peak oil occurs and as oil starts to run out, you're going to find more and more people living in city centers. We already, since 2000, I think 10 it was, more than 50% of the world's population lived in cities.
Probably the first time ever, I would assume.
First time ever in history. Yeah. And so you're going to find that more and more and more. Suburbs will dry up, mass transit will proliferate, and cars will cease to exist. They will be either turfed over to being completely solar and energy, or
we'll all be driving Teslas and then ride in Tesla buses.
Right. And hopefully, there's a locked room with all the technologies that people are hiding, because there's a profit motive to not use it yet. And as you see technology comes out, like longer lasting lithium ion batteries that cars can drive 5,000 miles or 500 miles. These things are starting to be realities. Right. So you're going to see a shifting in the landscape of humanity, and I hope it's for good. It's
kind of interesting that the shift towards electric cars and solar energy is really, by and large, driven by one guy. Elon Musk saying, yeah, we're going to make electric cars. Fuck, I'm going to put billions of dollars. It's still amazing that in this era of multinational corporations and conglomerates and really everything being a zaibatsu, the old Japanese tradition of like massive interlocked corporations that are all mutually dependent upon each other. Right. You can still have one crazy, smart, massively rich dude,
South African
guy who's like, all right, I'm gonna remake cars, and I'm gonna remake energy, and I'm gonna remake space.
Yeah.
I mean, he's setting up to be able to battle the power grid infrastructure in this country within the next 10, 15 years is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It takes somebody with that kind of resources and that kind of insane drive to do it, but it can still be done.
Right.
Which blows me away. So it makes me interested to see what's going to happen in other hotbeds of entrepreneurial activity as other countries like China have a more of a platform for people to be entrepreneurial and to make money outside of just the Russian Chinese system of get in good with the state, and they give you a certain sector that was only state regulated. Now you're a billionaire.
Right.
As long as you toe the party line, pay the right bribes, don't get caught paying the bribes, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So, it's kind of like the ultimate human ideal, where despite the other 99.99999% fucking up, that 0.0 repeating 1% can be enough of a maniac and brilliant enough to advance technology or society enough that it can build the levees, that extra half inch or extra foot or extra 20 feet that'll keep the waves and the wolves from the door.
Well, it is a historical precedent. I mean, the world has been moved in significant ways by a few people. It's the cult of personality. If you look at everything from Genghis Khan to Charlemagne to Napoleon to Hitler to MacArthur and Eisenhower, you have a few people who have done 90% of the major accomplishments.
There's like 1,000 people that have driven everything that's ever happened.
Right. Look at the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts, and I mean, even
the kings and queens who were famous throughout history in other countries.
Famous or infamous.
Generally warlords. Let's be honest.
Right. There are a handful of people. I mean, one of the interesting things about Tibet is they've managed to up until godless China came in, they were able to convince every warlord who came through with their armies that they were descendants of former warriors, and if you use us as your spiritual advisors, you don't need to attack us. They Jedi mind tricked people for thousands of years until godless communists came along, and they were able to keep power by stroking people's egos. So, it's the
There's nothing new under the sun. Right. Human nature doesn't change.
Right.
So yeah, it takes, you know, a natural disaster to punch you in the face. But in the meantime, Elon Musk will save us all. So save up, buy a Tesla, don't live on the coast, and have your underground bunker ready to go. Because we're going to be safe here in Nevada. We'll keep the lights on and the strippers ready for you. So see you after the apocalypse.
For Daniel Lowber, I'm John Douglas. This is Black Mountain Radio saying get your go bag ready to go.
Absolutely. Till next